Welcome back to the Four Podmen, the wrestling podcast we bring you each and every week on the Dynamo Podcast Network. Head over to YouTube, smash that subscribe and bell notification button. Audio versions of the show are available on Anchor, and if you'd like to contact the show, you'll find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, especially on Twitter at TPodmen. Joining me tonight for a very interesting episode, let's say, where we're going to take a look back at the one Chris Benoit with his anniversary, the anniversary of the tragedy upon us. Joining me tonight, as always, the D-O-double-G. How you doing, Jay?
Oh, I'm in great form, fine fettle. It's a somber subject, but it'll be reticent to be honest. It's what we do here, man. We dissect, we divulge, we are fans, first and foremost. Yep. Let's get into the subject.
Also joining me, the Beef Joe Duignan. How you doing, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. A lot of tough subjects recently, so yeah, going to be another tough one.
They're wearing on you at this stage, and obviously joining us, the podfather of the network, Ian the Dynamo Kelly. How we doing, Ian?
Sorry for my sour face. Now I'm smiling. Yeah, very well, very well.
Good. We thought we'd approach this subject slightly in a different way and ask the question: really, is it possible to separate the man and the tragedy from the performer and look at it kind of in isolation? Obviously, it's not something that happens in the wrestling world at the moment in terms of WWE and stuff like that. But obviously, this is a man who had a huge fan base, massive following, and obviously things took a very sharp left turn that weekend in Atlanta. But before we get into that, Jay, give me your thoughts.
The kind of phrase often said on these difficult subjects: where do you fucking start? I mean, coming at him and the subject and all we have around it, you're almost torn every time the subject comes up. Is he? Isn't he? And it's always that same fucking statement. Oh, Hall of Fame, Hall of Fame. Oh. Well, this is the Hall of Life, and we're going to be talking about reality, both sides of the coin. I've said it many times before. In any subject, in any situation, in any form of entertainment, if you are unwilling to separate the art from the artist, there will be very little left on your shelf, in your collection, in your heart, and in your hobbies. Most of the lines of escapism we find as humans is created by men who teeter on the balance of fucking sanity. This is where genius lies. This is why most normal men don't create. You know, and
Vincent Van Gogh cut his own fucking ear off, you know.
Van Gogh, Socrates, fucking you name it.
Yeah.
Through the annals of history, this isn't a new subject. It's an old subject in different subjects and bigger subjects. But we're here to speak honestly about something as fans, and we'd be doing the subject a great injustice if we just chose to sweep it under the carpet and fucking ignore it. That's not what we do. That's not what we're here for. What he did resonated still to this day. It wouldn't be so spoke about without the back end of what happened. If what happened before that didn't matter. Many men who didn't matter in their career, in their chosen professions, were forgot about if they did heinous things. This man isn't one of them, and we're here to sit and discuss neutrally if we can, which is going to be very difficult. But we'll have to at least give it a go.
Joe, thoughts?
Look, I loved Benoit. I right off the bat, I'm just going to say it. I loved him. I thought he was fucking phenomenal. Always excited to see him. I was a bit of a student of his game, I have to admit, because I was wrestling at the time. He was kind of at his peak, and I had as I said, a deep love for him. So, when that tragedy happened, it was pretty sickening, and and it's tough as someone who would have gone out to bat for the guy, to when something like that happens, you're just gonna go, oh fuck, it's like you get a real sinking feeling. It was horrific.
It's when the heart and head go to war with each other in the same
Yeah.
being.
Yeah, and I have wrestled with that over the years. Like, can I still look back on how much I love this guy and be okay with it? And I've come to the conclusion I can. Now, I don't go out of my way to look back on his matches or anything anymore, but I can. I have told myself it was okay for me to love him then, because I didn't know what was happening outside of the ring, So, I've allowed myself to not beat the shit out of myself for being such a massive fan of his at the time.
It's an interesting the way your opinions on it grow with you as a human. It almost grows with you. Do you know what I mean? Your initial approach to the subject kind of develops with you. The later on in life you get sorry for hijacking the commentary here, but you do. It's almost like a personal development and how you appreciate art and separating it from the artist as your own personal growth on the subject goes. It's a hell of a subject.
Because as I said, Jay, I was annoyed at myself for being such a fan of him.
Yeah, yes.
I genuinely was. I was so pissed off myself. And as I said, it took me a long time to realize, Joe, you didn't know. Don't worry about it. You didn't know.
Yeah, guilty of nothing.
It was okay.
Yeah,
it was okay to be a fan. Don't worry about it. So as I said, I don't go out of my way to find his stuff now, but I do look back fondly on him. I thought on his wrestling now. Solely on them.
It hurts when you happen across it and you realize how brilliant he was.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Ian, thoughts?
I have a bit of a different one there than the two lads, because Joe will verify that Benoit was kind of my next coming of Dynamite Kid. I think that would be fair to say, Joe, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I pretty much modeled a lot of my modern stuff when I got into the game on what I was seeing him. It was kind of like, right, this is the modern version of him. Let's get involved in this. And like, I remember, this is so ridiculous. I was sitting. It was the first time in years. I remember it so vividly. It was June, because June's always my birthday month, so of course you always remember that, and obviously, the anniversary of that tragic event is coming up soon. And I was sitting on the bed, and I remember I was in my room in Bray, and I remember I was playing something stupid. I was playing some stupid game, and it would have been, we would have been still kind of. I think at this time I'd gone back to training and everything like that as well. So it was 2006, and I happened to put on the radio, and Adrian Kennedy phone show was on. Remember that used to be on at night?
Yeah.
And I said, fuck it, I remember this. This is just so random. I put it on, and I was like, shit, this is actually a bit of crack. I'll fucking have a listen to this. And Adrian, your man Adrian and Adrian Kennedy, for anybody listening to this, it's an Irish talk show. It's like a Dublin talk show, national radio show, where you just have callers.
It was a nighttime gossip call-in,
yeah.
Basically contemporary subjects of the time which were shocking.
Exactly.
And everybody would throw in their fucking 2 cents into double bollocks.
Exactly. Yeah. And I remember your man Adrian, who was a bit more likable of the two characters, come on and said, oh my God, this is just breaking news here. The wrestler, Chris Benoit, now, and I shit you not, guys, this was my whole, I was like, what? Has been found dead in his home with his whole family. And I went, what the fuck is this? Like, just the irony and the weirdness of that situation. And I mean, it's so weird. Like I say, how do I turn on this radio show that I haven't listened to since I was a nipper, trying to get away with listening to it when I was supposed to be in bed for school? Do you know what I mean? And I turned this on and go, what in the name of Jesus? And they're like, we don't know yet. It looks like a murder, blah, 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 because that's how it all comes out. Now, we're not going to get into the whole thing, but when the whole truth of the thing came out, I didn't watch a Benoit match properly. I don't think I ever have, actually, to be honest with you. If I'm being honest with you, I don't think I've ever sat down and watched it again. Like Joe says, Niall, you probably remember, I went back when the WWE Network came out. I went back and watched Nitro from day one all the way through, and I'm actually still in the midst of it, and trying to catch up, and I always skip it. It's just weird. I don't know whether it's and it's just weird for me because I'll never forget walking down shortly after I brought my little sister down. It would have been about 8 or 9 at the time, and I was walking her down to the shop, and I just looked at her little head and her little body and went, Jesus Christ, that's what happened to that man's kid a couple of days ago. You know what I mean? I done the opposite. I took myself away from the art and took myself away from everything and went to the human side. And I don't know if I've ever got back to the Benoit side. So it's still pretty difficult,
The
you
word
know.
is unsettling.
Yes, it's unsettling. Like, I mean, I've seen Benoit matches in the meantime, and like sometimes I'm able to zone out and just gotta go, right, let's watch the art, but it's still not the same. Still not the same for me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird one because I actually
Mm.
I'm the opposite. I make a point on the 21st of June every year that I put an hour aside and I watch the WrestleMania 20 match.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's my way of dealing with it. And because I was such a huge fan of Chris Benoit to
Yeah,
the
me
point
too, yeah.
where I traveled to Chicago to meet him and I wanted to be there for his speech on stage when they inducted Eddie Guerrero into the Hall of Fame after he passed away. So
Yeah.
I made a point of meeting Chris Benoit in Chicago as well.
I've seen the picture, yeah.
Yeah, and he was a guy that like it's kind of weird. It's I had loads of pictures with him and stuff like that, and I've kind of never put them away. Um, I've never shied away from the subject. If anyone has approached me in the shop to talk about Chris
Yeah.
Benoit, I've always made my feelings known about it. I've never in any way tried to justify what happened that weekend or the
No.
tragedy in any way, shape, or form. Um, but I'm a pro wrestling fan, and what Chris Benoit did outside of stadiums and what he did in his own life, that's not my place. My place is what Chris Benoit did in promos, in meetups, inside the ring, all that kind of stuff. And I
Maybe not
think,
in promos, but
well, he had his moments at times in those promos as well. Remember, um, but I just think it's such a tough subject to discuss because to try and find that line of separation is so difficult. And
yeah.
to be honest with you, for the whole year, I might never think about it generally. You know what I mean?
No.
But on that day, I feel I don't know what it is, just some sort of an obligation to watch that match that I believe is the pinnacle match of his career, if you like, when he won the world heavyweight title. And that moment that I see him in the ring there with Eddie Guerrero and they both have the belts
Oh,
and the confetti's coming down and it's a moment.
pre-crisis, I don't believe there was any more genuine melting of the hearts in any situation or instance. Again, sorry for hijacking, but you're not
No, you're
wrong.
fine. I just
The pair of them in the ring,
Macho reuniting with Liz.
it means much more than this.
yeah. I just find that
Yeah.
moment for me is it's one of the pinnacle. Like when we talk about Mount Rushmore, that moment would be one of my Mount Rushmore moments in wrestling in terms of two guys who came up the hard way again
Yeah.
with issues in a big man sport and stuff and tried to be buried in
This
smoke.
shit, we
And I
did it.
just and it was kind of like that moment is just it resonates with me to the point where I had that plaque in my shop and both boys had signed it.
Yeah.
And I just and I often got spoken to. I often had customers coming in and going, "Why is that still up on the wall?" And I used to say to them, "I don't know," but it has never occurred to me to take it down, because of that moment in history, And
You're not wrong. You're not wrong either, Noel. Like, and that's what I was saying. Even like, I should have closed out my last bit like that. I have come to terms with like after seeing the whole documentary, the Dark Side documentary that they did with Benoit and all, and understanding the whole how the brain works and understanding the dynamic between him and Eddie and what it meant to Benoit and seeing the downward spiral, which I'm sure we're going to get into. So you're not wrong, for feeling that way. Nor
Yeah.
should you be. People cope and deal with things in a different way.
Yeah, and it's just kind of like it's just the level at which the darkness in which it descended into is so unforgivable and so unbelievable. Speaking as a father who has kids and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I can fully flip to that side as well and go, how could you do that to your kid?
Seeing how delicate and small, innocent and genuine the child is,
Yes.
Yeah.
and holding it, you know what? We're doing it right now. Man, usually on these podcasts, we go from the start of the career to the end, and we have started at the end. I don't know whether you would be into it, but would love to come in from a different perspective
That's
and
where
go
Niall's gonna come
from the
in.
start. Yeah,
That's Niall's plan today, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think Niall, you're 100% right the way you've approached this today. So I'm
yes,
looking
no,
forward
he's
to finding out.
100% correct, and I just noticed we were doing it again. We to begin to begin. You
Well,
know?
we had to say it at the start. Just
Yeah. Oh, hey, I'm
premise.
not in question.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
in question.
I think in order to get an understanding, because when we do these episodes, what people don't understand outside of the podcast is the four of us are not sitting around all week planning this episode like it's a movie circuit run
No.
through or something. You know what I mean? This is we come on and we all have different views and different points, and we don't
And
necessarily
we're very
discuss it
emotional
before.
about wrestling.
Yeah, but we don't discuss it beforehand. So that's
It's
why
not
I always,
scripted, yeah.
yeah. So that's why I always ask you guys, what's your thoughts? What do you think? So we gauge and we see where people are at. Where you guys, Joe alluded to the fact that he doesn't necessarily watch his matches. Ian, you alluded to the fact that you wouldn't necessarily be able to watch them at times, but you've come around to a bit.
Yeah.
And I'm a different dynamic where I can turn around. I can watch a Chris Benoit match. And to me, it's very difficult as well because I'm actually watching him perform in the ring, and what a performer he was. I mean, unbelievable. I mean, when we talk about Dynamite Kid and we talk about Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn and Chris Benoit, you know, performers, students of the game, art, everything you want to put in there, guys who absolutely handed their life over to the business.
He was the cream of that whole crop of next
Yeah.
generation Dynamite wrestlers. He
But-
was the figurehead.
He took
Well-
well, I mean, it was passed to him from the man, personally. You know? Yeah.
But when I look at his matches, there's a kind of let's say a spectrum that I go on, if you like, and it's kind of like I'm trying to absorb the match. I'm trying to enjoy pro wrestling because I'm a pro wrestling fan, but I also know that something of what's happening in front of my eyes played a part in what happened that weekend in Atlanta, and that's where I sometimes find the difficulty in it.
Yeah, I
Even-
find the difficulty in that too, Noel, purely because I am a fan of the sport first, and I'm almost on, like, you almost might find me, you know, at the front line with the pick, you know, with the placard saying "Stop blaming fucking wrestling" too. You know what I mean? It's such a fine line. I get where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, well, I'm not only blaming, I'm not blaming wrestling solely or in any way, but there's no doubt about it in terms of the analysis that was done on the man's brain. There's no doubt that there was identified CTE or brain damage there in all areas of his brain,
Absolutely.
which could
Absolutely.
only be attributed to impact, which could only be attributed to the part that he played in the sport. But this was the character that he played. This was the style that he wrestled. But there's also what I call mitigating factors, and these are factors that I discussed that I don't think, again, doesn't justify in any way what happened or anything like that from any point of view. But you know, like things like, you know, performing continually at the highest level with literally no downtime. We've often spoken on this podcast about the pressures of being the world champion. And
I think the company more so than the sport itself. Yeah, I think people, I think you're right there, and this said company, WWE, let's not beat around the bush, have since that fateful day have always been on the brink of having to change certain things, and their policies are changing every day and every week because of that one fateful moment. And I think it was all down to that. To now, that doesn't mean that's the company's fault. Of course it doesn't. However, the workload and what's expected. I mean, look, this has only happened once. Do you know what I mean? On such a grand scale.
Yeah.
So it's not like we can say, that's why I say we can't blame the sport, because not every other wrestlers went out and, you know, killed their wife and kid.
Man, I'd still like to start at the start. I'd still like to.
Oh, we're getting there. Noel has a plan for there, but we just wanted to get all this out of the way. I think first and foremost.
No, not a question. I don't want to do the subject of the service. It's just I am a conflict as well. When I watch him, he's a professor of his art. He is. He's exceptional. He's special, and we will most certainly get to that point.
Well, let's get into it then, Noel. Let's Jay's
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Let's get into it. Yeah.
Well, he obviously,
I think Jay's right.
as a performer, he was unbelievable.
Exquisite.
Modelled himself basically on the Dynamite Kid. Without a shadow of a
Carbon
doubt.
copy almost, yeah.
In terms of work rate, in terms of intensity, in terms of everything. And also there's parallels there in terms of not the biggest man in the world, but certainly pushed himself to that point to put himself in that position. Not dissimilar to his best friend Eddie Guerrero, who did the exact same thing.
Parallels.
It's uncanny, really, isn't it? The parallels.
Parallels,
History of the
man.
business.
Yeah.
So
even the body shape and how they walked around, like it was just like when you work the same shit in the same gym at the same time to get to the same place. Carbon copies, but with different flavors, and both equally exquisite and at the pinnacle of their game. At any point we tune into them.
Yeah. So I think
Hell of a story.
Yeah, but I think most people are kind of familiar with his work. I mean, the matches he had in New Japan were unbelievable. The matches that he had in WCW were unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But it kind of the story kind of evolves into this point where they come into WWE and they come in as the Radicals. Joe, do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, look, I had no idea who the fuck they were when they arrived. I didn't watch WCW, so I had no idea. The WWE made a big hubbub about them, and I just went, who the hell are these little fellas? Like they're
vanilla midgets.
Yeah, you know what I mean. I was just like,
yeah, yet they're all taller than you.
Oh yeah, more than likely. Yeah. I'm only a little fella, but you know, but I was just, I didn't think much of them initially. You know what I mean? Because I had no idea of their legacy. I didn't even know Benoit was a former world champion. You know, I knew absolutely nothing about them. And but Jesus Christ, did I learn to fall in love with them fairly quick? You know, when as you guys said, all four of those guys between the ropes.
It was a
Good
breath
God.
of fresh air that company didn't realize it needed, and how badly it was needed.
Yeah, and
they were exquisite.
Yeah, but I particularly fell in love with Benoit and Saturn. They were my two standouts out of the four. Yeah, I loved those two guys, and then of course when Saturn went off on the Moppy stuff, I kind of lost interest in him. But you know, but Benoit, I was head over heels in love with. Thought he was absolutely magnificent. I thought he looked the part. He walked the part. You know, I was mesmerized by him, lads. I have to admit. You know, I thought he was. He
was legitimate.
He drew me in from minute one. You know, minute one in the ring, not when, as I said, not when he first turned up, but minute one in the ring, I was just like, good Lord, how have I not known who this guy was before now? Just loved him. And as I said, it took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I did love him. I'm okay with it now, thankfully.
Ian, you obviously would have loved him through the WCW days as well, yeah?
Yeah, it was obviously when I jumped over to WCW in late 97, 98, I I'd kind of had an eye on some of those guys anyway, because I'd still had like tapes. Like I was kind of, as Jay knows as well, as I said, like I was always able to get my hands on tapes, but like it wasn't like you were getting your hands on them every week. Do you know what I mean? Like you'd get tapes like maybe once a month, once every 2 months, and you'd get like a bit of a mix of everything. Like, so it would be a mix of WCW stuff. So I was seeing these guys, but I'd be lying if I was saying in 96, 97, I was seeing every bit of work that they were doing at that time, because it was very difficult to get, unless you had someone that had TNT, which I realized my uncle had later when Brett jumped ship, and I was like, fuck, why couldn't you tell me this before, Freddie? But
God damn it, Freddie.
You could have saved me a lot of money instead.
Fucker.
I was buying, like, you know, all those magazines that were like basically black and white magazines, like those shitty knockoff magazines.
Yeah. The old newspaper type of one.
Yeah, I was buying them and basically getting all my pocket money and saving it up and fucking going and getting money orders and going down to the bank.
PWIs, that was where my love of lists was born.
100%.
50 pages of lists. Brilliant.
Yeah, then the next page was like, buy this one as well, where it's just two girls wrapped around each other in like a fucking gym. But
sleazy snuff movie pictures of fucking the Iron Sheik with Sergeant Slaughter from 1994 in Turkey in a match somewhere. Like, oh wow, look at this shit.
But staying on subject, He, yeah. So when I started watching it properly from the Nitros, like all the way through, Jericho was the first one that stood out to me purely because, you know, at the time I was so bitter, obviously, at WWE for what they had done to my hero. I was only 13 years old, so I was like, oh. And I saw this blonde kid coming out, you know, from Calgary, Alberta, Canada, because they did actually announce Jericho from Calgary. And I was like, oh, who's this guy? He must be part of the Hearts. So I'm going to have a bit of that. But then Benoit was still kind of in the Horsemen at the time. And he was knocking around with those guys. And I had obviously known about the kid. I'd seen lots of the kid. Do you know what I mean? And Tony Schiavone used to say that, models himself on the Dynamite Kid, blah, blah, blah. That was his kind of shtick. And as soon as I saw him, I think the first time I saw him was in the ring with, he was in with Mongo McMichael in a tag match. And I think, I want to say it was Scott Steiner and Kurt Hennig, actually. Because the four horsemen still would have had a bit of beat the Podmen.
Whoa.
with the NWO, and that was kind of like my first. And when I saw him work, I was like, "Oh, good lord, who was this guy? This is ridiculous." You know what I mean? Because you wouldn't have seen him in promos. You'd have just seen him hanging around the guys all the time. He was there, looking dangerous, and he always had a humongous head for his body as well, which made him look shorter than he actually was, because he was about 5'9", 5'10", you know what I mean? He wasn't the shortest guy in the world. But at the same time, he just looked like an evil motherfucker with that beautiful mullet as well that he had, but it was always wet. It was slick was coming down, you know?
And a little soul glow.
And he wore the leather waistcoat.
He wore the leather
Yes.
waistcoat, the same Pillman.
Cool, yeah,
like the Pillman one, yeah. And he had the red trunks on with the black inlay around the crotch. And then the four I was about to say the four Podmen thing again. If only he was repping the four.
If they're coming after me, it's on you.
Well, you know what? That's my cross to bear. Grizzly Adams is still coming after us too.
So you were the one on the grassy knoll, yeah?
Oh, you know what? It was all me. I was in the library. But no, that was my first interaction with him. Yeah, so I mean, as soon as I went to WCW, but now that we say it, the two that popped me, because I had known of Eddie Guerrero as well, because of the fucking again, for the same thing, seeing him in those little short kind of clips in these, you know, VHSs you go, because they would promise you in these VHSs, as you know, Niall, that you'd get full matches and stuff, but it was little snippets of fucking shit.
Yeah.
You know, you were like, you son of a bitches, and you couldn't exactly call customer care on these fucking magazine lines. You know, call the hotline. Yeah, you get through to nobody. And
you could call customer care, but then the next month your mum would be throwing you out of the house because of the phone.
Oh no, this happened. I was in my nanny's house and there was bills all the time, and they're like, who the fuck is calling America?
Yeah, £5 a minute, like
yeah. But Eddie Guerrero, believe it or not, when he wore the white singlet and he just had that little muzzy, and it was shortly after you know, Art Barr died and he went solo. He was one that stood out to me as much as any of them, to be honest with you. I always had just an intrigue for his kind of style and just his look, even, you know what I mean? Because at that time it's all about look, it's aesthetics, you know what I mean? Like, what's this guy about? He looks cool. And you're reading the magazines and they're talking about how this guy is great and this guy is great and that guy is great. So when I was
just on that, Ian, if you don't mind me jumping in.
Yeah.
Just when you said it there about the look, it's probably why I fell in love with Benoit and Saturn. They were just too big, muscly dudes,
monsters,
like
big bosses. You know what I mean?
Yeah, compared to the other two at the time, especially.
Exactly. But for me, like
any man can wear muscle. Most men can't. These men carry the muscle. They weren't like other people. They were literally just.
But in WCW at that time, though, Jay, I have to say, like, Jericho, when you look back, was probably one of the more physically impressive of the lot, because he was actually in great shape and he was way too big to be a fucking cruiserweight. But the great thing about Jericho was you forgot about it, and what drew me to him was just the ridiculousness of him. He looked like a jacked up Vince Neil walking down the road.
Well, he had asshole charisma.
Oh, ridiculous charisma. So he was amazing. So Benoit wasn't the first one to really jump out at me until, you know, I start, because even to then I was still like, even Brett was saying at the time, he's like, yeah, Benoit is good, but he's not the Dynamite Kid. You know what I mean? And I was kind of like, yeah. So I was a little bit kind of like, I'd agree with that. He's not Dynamite. And you know, when you're that young, you've got your favorites, and you're like, it's like for you, Jay, if you know,
The Renegade's not the Warrior.
yeah, or a
thing.
cheap.
It's not the same
Rose
thing. Like,
impersonator, a cheap Axl Rose impersonator comes in and plays.
Who, Vince Neil?
No, but the actual cheap impersonator that went in. You know what I mean? Miles Kennedy. You know, it's these kind
Fuck
of guys.
Fuck you, pal. Fuck you.
So when you get guys like that coming in, I was like, no, I'm not the same. So I never actually took to Benoit a whole lot on WCW, even when my appreciation came from Benoit more so, because I'd rather be honest, it came more so later in life when I start getting into the business. Do you know what I mean? And that's when Joe will tell you I became infatuated with him then, because I was like, right now I see where they're making these, you know, comparisons. But I was more, Guerrero was more my guy, if I was being honest, until I got involved, and then I was all Benoit. It's like, you know.
Awesome. Jay, early memories of his career and stuff like that, and when you're a WWF fan.
Miles Kennedy.
I am. You know, it's an interesting one for me, and the Vanilla Midgets are the saviors of the business.
That's a better one. Yeah,
it absolutely is. As we spoke often, I've always slipped in and out of business since the age I was fucking 5 or 6 or some silly shit. I come and go. When I found fucking school, I left wrestling. Always continued a love for it. When I found drink, stopped watching wrestling. I still love them both. But it happened like that in segments for me through my whole life. But I always was very good friends with men who didn't jump in and out the way I did. And these are men I trust and love. And when they say things to me like, you need to see this shit, I'm like, yeah, I'll get to it eventually. You know, 3 years later, I never touched her. But like, I sat down with men and I was watching the fucking videos, and they were putting it in front of me. I'm like, don't think much of that. Don't think much of that. What's that? Oh, this guy, yeah. And it would have been Andy in all WCW videos. And I still have his collection, of the WCW collection that he used to bring up to me in the house in Castleknock. And it would have been maybe, I can't even remember the year. But it was a hindsight. But at a time when I was out wrestling, and I fell in love with it again through these VHSs. And again, I was probably one of the only guys in the Greater Dublin region still putting fucking video cassettes in.
A shout out to Andy. He was more so a friend of Jay, but a mutual friend of
a brother and a son, and a man who understood wrestling far better than I ever will.
Mutual friend.
But again, there was times when I'm a stubborn idiot and I won't watch when people tell me to watch. And there's times when he just, and Benoit and Guerrero and Malenko and Saturn were one of those. And I was like, no, listen to me. Sit down and watch this shit or we're not friends anymore. I'm like, okay, now you've got my attention. And Jesus Christ, what I was watching in the ring was fucking exquisite. It was like wrestling I hadn't seen before because I was too young to watch it or to understand it when it was the first time around, when it was Dynamite Mark 1. I didn't get it then. I was too small, and I'm not going to pretend to appreciate it when I didn't. It was just glitter and lights and amazing things. But I was old enough to appreciate the sport. And it was these 4 men who re-injected a love that concurrently, actually, you know what, if I think about it and consider it, it was Andy's forcing of what I used to love back on me through other friends that has continued my concurrent love for the business up until this point, sitting with you 4 men. So much thanks to him, much thanks to the Vanilla Midgets. They made it real again.
Let's not use Kevin Nash's ridiculous analogies on this show anymore. Vanilla Midgets.
No, listen to me.
Vanilla. He was
I will
vanilla
put
bank.
that on their chest as a badge of honor, as a medal. I will take that insult and turn it around and make it something worth fucking respecting, because that asshole never did anything close to what these men did.
No.
They
You have to mute yourself, Jack.
give me a second.
That was Dynamo. That wasn't me. My answer.
But no, that company had the savior. It would still be a company if they respected what they had. When they broke the curtain,
Kevin Nash
different.
coined that phrase. It's actually mad. I was listening to Jim Cornette. He coined that phrase about Jericho and Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. Called them vanilla midgets. Kevin Nash. Yeah.
Imagine him insulting people on his weekly show who could wrestle but weren't as witty as him in fucking segments. I mean, fuck off talking. This is a wrestling show, and we are sitting down as fans to watch professional wrestling.
Yeah.
And there's men breaking the curtain who do it better than anybody has ever done it. They're the apex, the epitome. What Dynamite laid down, these men took up, looked at it, understood it, and said, you know what? If we break this down into 4 parts, and you have a piece, 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 and we come together, there's the makings and the guts of a fucking 5-year run of a great card, of a brilliant business, and we can take everything that is lineage and heritage and take these straps and take this whole fucking company and let the world love wrestling again and fucking run with the ball. And that company dropped the ball because men who were making more money than they were wrestling moves decided to coin phrases like the vanilla midgets. Fuck him. Fuck that phrase. They were amazing. And the other fella realised it, picked up on it and grabbed them. And look what they did to his business.
That's true. Well said, Jay.
They were brilliant. When they broke that curtain, you believed business was going to be taken care of. There's a lot of this. Wrestling is a promo business. It's nice to hear somebody who can talk, alliterate, punctuate, and get it done when it's time to talk. But the most you will see of them in any given show, you'll see 2 minutes of chatter and 40 minutes of clatter. And them men could go all fucking life.
Yeah, would it be fair to say, lads, that with Benoit, you know, even what I was saying, like that I didn't appreciate him till I was older, would it be fair to say that it was only when he went to WWE that you really saw the polished article, as in like Vince knew what to do with this guy and said, you don't need to say much. You're the rabid Wolverine. Because, you know, with those, Niall, you remember this as well as anyone, with that ramp that they still had, you know, when you see them walking down, like that man didn't need
the intensity out of that motherfucker. He did more with a raised eyebrow than most people can do with 20 minutes of chat.
Yeah, I think that's when when the spotlight was on him, because we did get to see obviously his match with Sid when he won the belt and then just basically gave it up and said, fuck off, I'm out of here, you know what I mean? But that's, I think, when he went to the big Fed, you know, that's when we really saw Benoit becoming, wow, what is this?
Yeah, it was that sort of remember he used to look into the camera and he'd kind of look away and you got that sort of smiley smirk off him.
Yeah.
And he was missing the tooth.
The tooth, yeah.
Remember the toothless aggression and all that kind of
Toothless
stuff.
aggression, one of the greatest shirts in the business.
Toothless aggression.
And it was just mad. And I just remember at the time, it was just, he brought something different at the time. And it's mad at the time when you think about when he came in, they had a heck of a roster. And it's just, they just stood out.
Dynamite was so proud as well watching that, believe it or not. You know what I mean? He was so proud watching that, even though you never heard anything about it. Like it was like that's my guy. That's him. I made him.
But it was just when they came in, and it was just the intensity that he brought, and Eddie as well had kind of the same intensity, but also brought a flavor of comedy and a bit more to it.
He was charisma, man. He was charisma. He was everything. He was a shorter version of Scott Hall, but with more talent. He was oozing machismo, like.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just thought it's just, and you could see when they came in as well, the kind of brotherhood that was there, the real bond that was there between these guys. They just lived for the business and they just loved each other so much. And they came in, you know, you could see how their physiques evolved over time and all. They came in with a view that this is what they were going to do. They were going to go in there, shake the foundations of the business, and create something in moments in time that were very, very special. For guys who people would have tried to hold back and hold down and never reach that height of the business, if you like. And that's why that picture of the two boys at Mania 20 in the ring with the belts.
And we need to mention the 5 lads. We keep saying the 4, but Jericho was very much part of that.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were the 4 radicals, but that was a 5 group. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The 5 of them. He went in earlier and set the scene.
In Exodus, most certainly, but in essence, like, he was different. He was already groomed. They knew with him, he was a pretty boy who could fucking go, and he had his own separate kind of.
No, but what I'm saying is they were 5 mates who were basically,
No question in their friendship.
And
But I mean, as a commodities,
Jericho
different.
was part of that work with Benoit, with Saturn, with Guerrero, with Malenko. It was the 5 of them that was like, we're the WCW boys. We're going to go in and show this fucking boss's fucking, son-in-law and all these guys that don't want us to do this. We're going to show them. And good Lord, did they?
It was kind of like the invasion that we envisaged, but we
Yes.
never got, wasn't it? When
Yes.
you think about it,
Yes.
these guys were signed. They didn't come in as an invasion. But boy, did they shake the business to its foundations when they did it.
It was real to all of us again. God damn it!
Yeah.
What an injection of talent.
Yeah, 100%.
And it was very real to all those boys as well.
Yeah.
Let's kind of touch on, obviously, Eddie passed away, which was absolutely shocking and terrible.
That was the worst, man. That was one of the worst. Yeah.
But I suppose in looking at Eddie's death, it's the impact that Eddie left on these guys. And I just remember hearing when Eddie passed away. I remember the interviews they were doing on WWE TV at the time. And I just remember seeing Chris Benoit talking and just being absolutely devastated. You could see
He couldn't do it. He couldn't even articulate.
Talk. He was so upset. No. And I even remember when they come out onto the stage normally to do the 10 bells and stuff like that. He was standing there and just the floods were running down his face. He just could not stop. It was like there was 2 taps on his face.
Yeah.
And I just remember this is a guy who was really, really, feeling the pain of this loss. This was his best friend, you know what I mean? That he had lost. They traveled up and down the length and breadth of the business. And they had overcome that. They got to the top of that tidal wave that those guys, in terms of the business, should never get to in the thinking of the business, you know what I mean? But they had overcome it. They had shown Vince McMahon that this is what the business was now about. It wasn't about these 6'7", 7-foot guys who really don't give a shit and don't really put in a shit for you. We're the guys who's going to do it for you. You know what I mean? And it was just, I just remember that period there, he was absolutely devastated. And it always resonates.
He lost his leader.
Never came back, Never came back.
It's different. He lost his leader. I think they all did. I mean, you take a look at how they came in. Eddie was the figurehead. He was the charisma of the 4 of them. He was their voice. He was their leader. He was their general. Chris wasn't an articulate man. He wasn't an overly emotional performer. He was a cold son of a bitch in that ring, and he went hard. He went long. Perry was an amazing technician and had some serious fucking beef and attitude and moved better than a man as so should. Dean was small. He couldn't talk.
Science. Wrestling science.
Yeah, but if you want somebody to be teaching a bunch of kids, Dean's your guy. Look, I love him. I bring him up regularly on these podcasts for a reason. He's a name that should never ever be forgot. But he's also the forgotten child of them, simply because he didn't have any of the other powerful strengths the other 3 did.
Saturn is the forgotten child more so.
No, Saturn was the fuck up. Saturn had it all. It was in his hands, but he just couldn't deal with it too well, and he got run through the mill. He would be
That's fair.
Look, all the pieces are there, but all of this is a side subject to the fact that Guerrero was their leader.
Can I say something on that, Jay? Actually, that's a really good point, because I read a couple of things, and I'm not gonna mention names here on this one because it's too delicate to be mentioning names here. But there was a couple of people that obviously would know, and they made a couple of points about the whole Benoit thing and the infatuation that Benoit had with Dynamite Kid, which obviously you're going to bring up at some point, Noel. And I know Brett mentioned it as well at one point. In fairness, it's there for everyone to see. And he said the difference with Tom and Chris is that Tom was someone that was a locker room leader that could go in there and command respect and would throw fisticuff, no problem. Do you know what I mean? Benoit could throw fisticuff, but would rather kind of just not do that. It was like, but Tom was the guy that was trying to be, or sorry, Chris was the guy that was trying to be Tom Billington. Do you know what I mean? And you can't really do that because, like Noel, you mentioned there, you know what Benoit, you know, if that was say Dynamite's best friend, you wouldn't see him on the top of the stage crying like that because he wouldn't show that emotion. We said it in the last show. He'd probably stand there and just go like that, steely face. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas there was,
Well, you know what's in?
no, but I was just going to say, sorry, there was certain people that mentioned that it's like Chris Benoit never really knew who he was other than the wrestler because again, he got in there as a kid and at 13-year-old, he said, I'm going to be the next Dynamite Kid and that's all I want to be. So it's like, that's who he was and that was it. He never got to know who Chris Benoit was. Do you know what I mean?
You know, I don't know what you mean. There's an interesting, if we're gonna do the parallels, and you have to fucking
Yeah,
have
of
between
course.
these.
Yeah.
Like Chris had Eddie, Tom didn't have an Eddie.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I think the loss of Chris on the stage for Eddie shows exactly. I mean, you can have a fucking ship with sails full of wind, but if you don't have a rudder, you've no direction.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Eddie was a legacy fucking man, long lineage of Guerreros behind him.
Oh no, but that's what I'm saying. It was like because I don't think Chris Benoit was necessarily the leader. I think that's what I was.
No, Eddie was most certainly their impetus. He was a voice, and
Would you agree with that,
Chris,
Noel? You think he seemed to be the backbone?
like,
Yeah,
Whereas-
absolutely.
you can see in Chris's heartbreak. You can see he didn't
Yes.
just lose a friend; he lost the man who helped him steer his career.
he was his road partner, and I mean, like you may as well like take away. These lads are married to each other. You know what I mean on the road, and that's what it is.
Absolutely. But then we obviously moved to that kind of that fatal weekend in Atlanta. And word circulates first of all that Eddie had no show. I think it was the Vengeance pay-per-view. So WWE obviously sent a wellness check to check up and see what was going on. No one had heard about him or heard from him. And obviously the police go to the house to do a wellness check and they find the three bodies there dead. And word circulates that Chris Benoit had passed away. And we've seen all the footage from the news in the States, police cars all around the house and everything being investigated. And then it was kind of like what happened at the time, you know, and no one was thinking of double murder suicide. No one thought that at all.
Nobody.
You know what I mean? Like this was Chris Benoit, who everyone thought was the family man, loved the kid to bits, would do anything for him. You would never think this. The first thing you thought of was maybe a break-in or something like that went
something
wrong.
has happened.
You know,
something tragic has happened. Yeah.
There was all sorts of conspiracies, going around.
But look, even the company itself, Raw, put out do you remember the first Raw where they put out tragedies happen as it's unfolding. Yeah, same here. Something is happening. We the world watched it unfold.
Man, that
I was heartbroken when I heard about that, lads.
Yeah,
Absolutely heartbroken. But then I went from heartbroken to being really angry. You know, when the truth did come out.
Did you go to confusion first, Joe? Like
No,
heartbreak
no,
to confusion, or was it straight to anger? Yeah.
No, as soon as I heard, I was fucking furious, and I think I was I was more furious at myself for, you know, as I said, I fought with myself for a long time about my, you know, being such a fan of that man, and I think I was angry at myself for being so upset about it, if you know what I mean. Like and thinking, you know, that we, you know, that the wrestling world had lost a great man, and then finding out that he was, you know, that he did something like that, and yeah, so I jumped very quick to anger, to be honest with you, and I was pretty pissed off for a long time, a very long time about it.
I think what happened with me was at that time, and I done this to myself kind of deal. I went back and Joe, you remember I used to have a proper collection of tapes that I used to have, and I used to mark them down. I'd have like every Raw, I had meticulously, you know,
Yeah.
marked every tape I had, and I went back and I
Ian,
watched.
you used to write down what arena they were in.
You what?
You used to write down the arena they were
I
in.
did,
Yeah.
and the attendance and everything. It was fucking ridiculous. But I remember shortly afterwards, I went back and I watched stupidly on my own part. I watched. Do you remember when he done his neck? Remember he was out for nearly a year when he done his neck. And do you remember that they panned home to the family bit where he's sitting with them and talking about the comeback,
Mm.
and he's sitting there with Nancy and Daniel there. That's what done it for me. I when I watched that, that's when I went. I wiped my hands of all this, and that's why for the longest time I couldn't even watch. But at the same time, I was like trying to understand it. I was seeking everything I could, like whether it be on YouTube or anything, to hear somebody to kind of put some sort of context on this to understand why. Do you know what I mean? Because this is the only question in all of this, right, lads? The why. That's the only question.
Yeah. And I suppose it's even more difficult when you think and you look back and, you look at like even the match with Brett, the own tribute match and stuff
Oh,
like that and all that kind of stuff. So that all comes flooding back as well. And you're trying to make sense of this you're trying to make sense of something that can't be made sense of,
yes, yes.
and, you drive to find those answers because you don't want to give up such a certain section of your fandom to this. And it's like as if you were best friends with a guy for 30 years, and after 30 years, you find out the whole thing was a lie, that he was someone else and he wasn't actually your friend, and none of this is real anymore, and you've been led up a garden path. And, this guy who you revered, and you bought the shirts, and you bought the pay per views, and you bought the DVDs, and you bought everything associated with him, the figures and the sipper bottles, and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, this happens. Um, and it's only later on, that we get into, we find out about Chris Nowinski and the organization he set up to look into some of this brain trauma and stuff like that and all. And he requested from Chris's dad to take samples of Chris's brain to run the analysis.
How heartbreaking, by the way, was it for him, for Chris's dad? I mean, that was one of the hardest things to ever watch, when that man was almost crying, saying that he almost regrets buying Chris a weight set. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, to me, that was absolutely heartbreaking, for any parent, and for his oldest son now and his oldest daughters as well. It was, yeah, that was heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Bless him, but I don't think Ant would have stopped Chris.
No.
Yeah, I think it's just it's the legacy that these moments leave behind. It's like sort of when you hear someone close to you, someone that you knew committed suicide, and they leave that kind of why behind, that can never be answered, and you sort of like you kind of live with it, but you can't understand it, and it's always that question that never gets an answer. And I remember it was very powerful at the time. I remember listening to a shoot interview, I think, with Bob Holly. And I remember Bob Holly saying, himself and Chavo or something like that, they were talking about how they were due to meet up with Chris that week in Atlanta and do lunch and shopping and stuff like that, whatever they used to do, well, stuff like that. And Bob said he rang Chris and he cancelled.
Yes,
couldn't
I
meet him.
remember this, yeah.
And I remember Bob saying that he actually, in some regards, holds himself a little bit responsible, because he believes that if he had went to Atlanta and met up with Chris at the time, and they had talked and gone out for food and drinks and done a bit of shopping, all that kind of stuff, that maybe it might not have escalated that weekend to that point. Now that's hypothetical and it's hearsay and stuff like that. It could still have happened anyway. But it was interesting to see Bob's slant on it, in terms of his friendship with Chris Benoit.
It's a hell of a thing to carry, isn't it?
It's a tough one,
I thought about this all week as well. And I don't know if any of you have watched, because I do think this is a very, very important factor that we need to talk about, because, there could be people as well as the Dynamite Kid show that we'd done previously. It's all well and good me being respectful to their family. There could be people here that have ties to Chris Benoit or whatever from that same, field that could be watching the show as well. And I don't want to do them a disservice or or Nancy.
Or Nancy's family.
Or Nancy's family.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely. Yeah.
But I do think it is a very, very important thing. And we go back to what Michelle said on the previous show about talking about CTE and all that kind of stuff and depression. Quite clearly, we knew the man was in depression when we look through those journals. They are haunting. And one thing I would like to say in particular is that for anyone that hasn't seen it, the Aaron Hernandez documentary, the American footballer that was it the Patriots that he was playing for? He was a big. I'm not too sure what team he played for. I wouldn't be up on the football, but I watched the show where he basically murdered two lads in cold blood, like, but like didn't even remember doing it, like just went off the rails. And then one side of the brain does remember it, and one side doesn't. And like in American football, this is the first one where they found signs of CTE, because of the amount of shots to the head and stuff like that, and lads going off the rails, and
And how the helmet is worse for it than not having the helmet on.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think when you do look at the people that talk about Chris, and including people that obviously would have been talking about, from Nancy's family as well, would have said, it was out of character. Now, a lot of people did say that there were problems at home, but look, show me a happy marriage that's just full of fucking sunshine and rainbows, and I'll show you a lawyer, like, you know what I mean?
No, it's hard to speculate on what you don't know. We can't speculate on what we don't know.
And you can't, exactly. So all we can talk about is what we do know. But what we do know is that the results did come, and Vince tried to refute this, and it's another one of the reasons why sometimes I kind of resent Vince McMahon too, by saying, well, he always tries to find an angle to go, well, I don't believe that. I was like, well, the science is fucking telling you this. The results concurred that he had the brain of an 85-year-old man or something with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And Vince is like, well, I dare say he couldn't come to work and operate, on a. But the thing is, on the final day, he couldn't, Vince. He couldn't. And look what happened. Because it's just like, sometimes I'm sick of these conglomerates and these guys that we build up, and especially the suits behind it all. You know what I mean? And I don't want to make this out to be because Vince isn't at fault for it or whatever, but it's the same thing with,
Well, his back was against the wall. If he had admitted culpability to Chris Benoit, it would have opened up the floodgate for every lawsuit against his company.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not pinning this on Vince, but at the same time, it's the same thing with the Brian Pillman thing. You know what I mean? Interviewing that lady when she's at rock bottom. You know what I mean? Sometimes the corporate head rears its ugly side, and you kind of go, Jesus, you are a scumbag, and it doesn't sit right with me all the time, and it seems like he gets a free pass every now and then just purely because he's Vince McMahon and he's entertaining and all that. But to deny those findings, that was wrong. I don't know if anyone wants to interject. Joe, you seem to be nodding your head, so you want to interject?
No, I'm just agreeing with you, and I think you're perfectly on the money there.
You're absolutely correct.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no more I can add to that, Ian. You're spot on. It was, as you said, to deny science, and and then you brought up the Brian Pillman thing, where he brought in the wife and said, oh, but he was, he was doing this and this was happening to him all. And when he promised he wouldn't do it.
How are you going to support your family?
Yeah, like when he promised he wouldn't do it, like, and then he fucking, on live TV, someone who's not used to being live on TV, you're a deer in the headlights. And not just that, she was still in mourning, and then, and as you said, to go back to where we're talking about now, to deny all these findings and just kind of brush them aside. But as Jay said, he has to look after.
He's obliged. From a moral standpoint, it's easy to highbrow and get up on the soapbox. But if we want to pursue that particular line of culpability, the responsibility lies with us in the audience. We're the ones who pay for fucking tickets.
You're 100% correct, Jay.
And
100%
Vince is the block between the performer and us as the audience. And I often do this on these podcasts. See that?
Yeah.
The most addictive thing in the world when the spotlight is on you is us baying for more extreme, better, higher, faster,
in any form,
more consequences,
in any form,
anything.
Yeah.
Formula One, fucking skiing, you name it. Us.
Yeah.
If the book doesn't stop with Vince, it goes way past him into his bank account, and for every billionaire, $1 of air cash is spent, and it's air money on the fucking table too.
A perfect example this week, and I know it's a little bit of a segue, but a perfect example of this week is like, you know, even with the Euros going on, you know what I mean? And it shows the power of influence of someone. You have someone as powerful a figure as Cristiano Ronaldo taking 2 Coke bottles away going, no. And then holding a bottle of water. And within the space of hours, Coke lose 4 billion. 4 billion. Now imagine that what Jay is saying is 100% correct. If the power of people went together and goes, that's the narrative we're going to go with, fuck that. That would go, you could bankrupt somebody within seconds. So I know the point seems off, but it is lending itself to what Jay was saying there. It is us.
No, that's exactly the point.
Because we are the consumers and we go back for more. So I'm not taking a moral high ground on this one at all, one shape or form. But at the same time, what I am doing is I'm calling Vince out for that. And that alone, you know, and that alone, it's not to that's not to say that Vince is responsible for somebody actually actively going and doing the deed that he did. And I hope people don't think that that's the case. Absolutely not.
Yeah, look, we've even seen it in more recent times with not a Vince in front. That young lad, fucking Osprey, he's after fucking himself up. Simply because we as fans have pushed the threshold of professional wrestling to the point where professional wrestlers feel like they need to destroy themselves to entertain the fucking plebs in the Coliseum below Caesar's fucking grand entrance. We're as responsible as anybody for all of this shit.
I think, I think you're right.
Yeah, and like, I mean, to follow on for your point, if you remember the reaction after the deaths of Eddie and Chris, they started introducing the wellness policy and all this kind of stuff came in, and the testing and all this kind of thing, and a number of wrestlers got suspended, a number of wrestlers got let go, all this kind of thing. Physiques and bodies changed over that period of time, if you remember, and stuff like that.
Guys got punished on that one as well, and we have to look at it that way. Guys got punished for looking the way they did when they looked at the way they did because of the model that required them to look that way. Yeah. And it's easy to go, whoa, look what we did. Well, no, but you created this one in the first place. I mean, people like Chris Masters and stuff like that were let go, who were very fine wrestlers. And that sent them into depression then, because they knew they couldn't get their job back. But once they were off the WWE pay scale, it was like, well, we don't really care what happens to them then. Yeah. It's like, you know, it goes back to the CM Punk thing, which I think, you know what? There'll never be a wrestler like CM Punk, and I'm going to give it to him. And he might be my doppelganger, so maybe that's why I have a little bit of fucking love for him too. And rest in peace, Andy, as well, because he's the one that started that, along with Joker Bray. But yeah, 100%, Jay. You know, the stand that he took and still takes to this day will never be measured with any other professional wrestler. Do you know what I mean? Because he teases it, but he'll never do it. And he basically sent a big fuck you to Vince. And when he said, you know what, it's amazing the guys that have been gotten rid of back in the day. Those promos were basically shoots. You know, Chris Masters and all were gone because, they didn't fit your narrative. When he turned around and said, I'll take your piss test, but are you going to make Hunter take the piss test? And are you going to take the piss test too, Vince? And they just went, you know,
it did at times feel very selective, didn't it?
Of course it was selective.
Oh, Legends contract. You don't have to piss anytime.
Yeah,
just work 5 years. Yeah, listen.
Well, Hunter isn't that was the best. Hunter isn't an active performer anymore, and he's like, well, he's wrestling me in a month.
No, look, we watched Brocky get kicked out of a fucking legitimate sport because he had to go back to WWE. Why? Because he'll never be able to piss without melting a cup again.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. And we were watching two sports when we compare the consequences of pushing yourself that hard to the point where you're a fucking pedigree thoroughbred racehorse. It's the old car adage again. Throw a supercharged engine into a Mini Cooper. You're only going to get 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, and see what happens.
Right?
Yeah.
We don't have these tragedies in MMA, and those guys are actually trying to kill each other till they're dead. We don't have these tragedies in other sports.
Yeah,
there's consequences to what we love.
Well, I think Noel was probably going to jump on that one too, but I will too. Again, it's the wrestling, the sport of wrestling that is always blamed on this. Oh, is pro wrestling just one of these? It's like the sport of pro wrestling isn't WWE. WWE is its own thing. Disney doesn't own the word entertainment.
Yeah. WWE is the Premier League.
Yes.
There's other divisions.
Exactly. Disney does not own the word entertainment or the word cartoon. There's other forms of that as well that are as enjoyable and done in a much more elegant manner. So I refute that claim that professional wrestling did this to fucking people. I fucking wholeheartedly refute that. Yes, Chris knew what he was getting into. Yes, he fucking basically did the damage to himself because he put his body on the line to do it every time. So he is as guilty as anybody in that sense. And he was the one that did what he fucking did. And no, that doesn't make Vince McMahon culpable because of the actions that he fucking, that he did on that over the course of 48 hours, lads. This was very meticulous as well. But the brain thing, this is the conversation we're having here. It's the fact that the brain was fucking gone.
Oh, was it the brain of a 78-year-old man?
85-year-old.
85.
And then for Vince to turn around and say, "No, I don't believe that." Why not go? Shit, I didn't realize that. Maybe we can work better, because Vince could have worded it a better way, but it's always just no.
Well,
I think the result of that was, although there wasn't an admission there, that there was a case where things were changed.
Yes, but again, other lads got punished for. Not everyone got punished.
Yeah, but I also think if I look back from then till now, is it fair to say that now in the current day that the athletes who perform professional wrestling are in a better place, are looked after better?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, John Cena said on that same documentary,
it's better. We have seen the tragedies have dried up.
About it, Jay. Do you remember you told me that one? They asked John Cena, "Have you ever taken steroids or growth hormone?"
Oh yeah.
I can't say that I have, but you'll never.
But you'll never. Yes, but you'll never prove that I haven't. Yeah.
So again, it's going back to what Joe said earlier. It was like certain lads were allowed to do what they wanted, but let's look at the lower spectrum. Do you know what I mean?
Allowance and scapegoat.
So I don't think there was real change. I mean, one lad said that he said his 2-year-old could run a fucking freight train through their test. You know what I mean?
Yeah, look, but is it fair to say now, forget about the current product in terms of the wrestling and what we enjoy?
But
in terms of if you look at an athlete now, are athletes in a much more healthier position? Are they looked after better? Yeah. Are they advised better? I mean, we don't hear, or it's not as prevalent, or do we not see it? The pill popping, the alcohol.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think in some respects, I think if you look at the top end of the business, and take for example, Randy Orton might be a good example. Randy Orton seems to have become, he's unbelievable in terms of performer and wrestling heritage and all that kind of stuff, and the legacy he's leaving and all. But hasn't Randy Orton become a very astute businessman in terms of his own workings and stuff like that and all? And this was a guy who, back in the day, in the early stages of his career, was kind of a bit of a loose cannon as well, and kind of did crazy stuff and things like that.
Yeah.
But
I'll interject there.
Yeah.
There is a difference with Randy and people like Randy and people like who we're talking about. Randy might have been a loose cannon and a little wild at times, but fundamentally he's happy in himself doing what he does. The likes of Chris and Eddie weren't. They're almost like a generation previous. They're the dregs of the 80s. They had to get into the business in a certain mindset and mentality, whereas now the business has got a lot better.
I'd sort of change that a little bit.
No, I think what Jay means, though, I think what Jay means there, Noel, to be fair, is that he means that like they were coming in the early 2000s, like late 1990s, early 2000s, where there was still that thing about the small man.
Yeah.
Whereas Randy is like a 6'5", 6'4" man, born into this
He
business.
was always genetically gifted.
Genetically gifted, whereas these boys, like, we're looking at someone like a Randy going,
We're trying to fill bigger boots. What we have done now, and this is a progression from a conversation we had about the purveyor of this level of genius.
yeah,
The ship that launched 1,000 matches, Dynamite. He was the one who made it okay to be not huge, but be great.
but he didn't know it.
Still, yeah, he didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
Well, he made it, he facilitated and paved the way for these men to step in, but they were still carrying the burden of a big man business.
And you knew you had to take monstrous amount of steroids to get to that fucking level. Because look at Eddie Guerrero, Noel, even when he first came in, when he was
twice the size. Watch him in ECW and watch him when he was wearing the gold.
Well,
the difference in the human.
He got fired for the year, and he went and he done lots of indie stuff, and he literally bollocks off, and he came back and he was fucking like that. And then Vince accepted him. It was like,
I suppose when I look at it, just to add to Jay's point, I would think that Chris and Eddie Guerrero were very happy in the business until they didn't have each other.
Yes, they were. Yes,
you know,
like I said, well, Chris didn't lose his love for business or life. Chris lost Eddie, and he was his general. He was his best friend. He was his fucking emotional compatriot. He what is there for younger men now, the likes of fucking, you know what, it's okay to go to speak to somebody when you're unhappy. It's okay to have bad days. That legacy of men didn't have that. They had camaraderie and fucking, we're in this together, we back to back, we'll fight the world and we'll get over it. And you're seeing that in the moment, in the Mania moment, you see that between them. There's nobody else in the room. There's nobody else on the planet except the pair of them looking at you going, told you. And you're all going like, I can't believe this. And it's almost an isolated, too human situation with the whole world watching on. And again, it's the Colosseum in ancient Rome. The whole world is just.
And I mean, to give Vince his props as well, as much as I'm giving out about him, like, let's talk about some of the matches there. Like, Noel, you had a list of matches there, 5 of them. I mean, is there any bigger payoff, you know, for Vince's respect for their work, at least in the ring,
for carrying his fucking $1 billion business?
Yeah, than WrestleMania, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I suppose to leave it and sum it up, lads, in a way, Kurt Angle came out on his show and he said that he was the best in-ring performer he ever faced. And that's kind of the magnitude of the man, really, you know, when you think about it. It sort of encapsulates it in terms of what our fandom was. But of course, never an easy one, boys. But always a pleasure.
If you mind, sorry, no, before you wrap up there, if you don't mind, if I jump in there for a second. I just want to say, lads, as horrible as this subject has been, I can only imagine how torturous it must have been for Nancy and the kid. They must have gone through torture for a long, long time, looking at, you know, watching this man fall apart in front of their eyes, you know. And unfortunately, Nancy couldn't get herself and the young lad out of there on time. So that it must have. I know we talk about how he was affected by the CTE and what his brain was like and all that kind of stuff.
But they're the victims.
Yeah, they're the true victims of this, lads.
Yeah, deserves to be said, Joe.
Yeah, I just want to put that in.
I'm glad you brought that up because we're not going to get into the ins and outs of what happened that night.
No. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just saying
balance.
Yeah, she must have gone through horrendous torture.
But they were tortured that night as well. And
yeah. But I'd say there was years of it in, unfortunately, and look, it was a tragic end, but there was a lot happening long before that.
Yeah, as always, I mean, our thoughts, you know, we always talk about pro wrestling because we're a pro wrestling podcast, but obviously our thoughts on the show would always go out to Nancy's family and extended family, and obviously Chris's family as well,
Daniel
um,
Benoit, the older son, yeah.
who have to live with it, you know. But man, until next time, Dynamo Podcast Network for the videos, Anchor for audio versions of the show. And if you want to hit us up, drop your comments in, what you think about the show. Give us your thoughts. Let us know what you think. And as always, it's been a pleasure, man. Talk to you again real soon.